Hi, I'm Susan Clare, GourmetQuilter, and I'm here today to show you just a little tutorial on a block that looks like it's creating shadows behind these squares here. So I think that's kind of fun. So if you imagine there's a light source coming down onto something and it's sitting above the background, it would create a shadow. So that's the sort of look we're after. I'm just using some 5-inch squares today. So just some that I've purchased, and just a little note about the 5-inch squares while we're here, the ones that we can purchase in these very delicious packs, is that quite often they have like a little pinked edge, or they might have a straight edge. Different companies do different things. I would suggest though that you just check your sizing before you start sewing and make sure that everything is sitting so that you know how it's all working. So these are really good. They are 5 inches square, and I've noticed that I'm just using the markings on my board to help me here, that the little pinked edge, the high point of the little zigzag is right on that 5-inch edge. So it kind of cuts into the 5-inch square just a little bit, so that would be into your seam allowance. So I'm telling you this so that you know, so that when you pop something right sides together to sew it together, you would have your pinked edge so that the points are level with the outside edge of your other piece of fabric, so that you can get your nice 1/4 inch seam allowance as you'd like it to be. So it's just worth checking. As I said, the different manufacturers have different methods, and things can be a little bit different from square to square. Well, perhaps from manufacturer to manufacturer. So this is the block that we're going to make. So this is our coloured square. Now it doesn't have to be just a simple coloured square, it could be any number of things. I've chosen to go with the 5-inch coloured squares, and then we need to create our shadow. So I've kept with some simple measurements so that we can have a go at this. So I've got a 5-inch square here, and then these are going to be a 1-inch finished shadow edge. So we're cutting the strips 1.5 inches wide, and whatever decision you make about how big you want your shadow to be, in this case 1 inch, then you need a 1-inch square at each end of the two sides. So if you only wanted a very narrow shadow because the sun's kind of right overhead and there's a less of a shadow, you'd only want this to be, if that was 1/2 inch, so you're cutting at 1 inch, you'd only want this to be a little 1/2 inch square, so cut at 1 inch. So I think you understand what I mean by that, so that this is proportional as a square to the colour that you're doing for your shadow. So we'll go ahead and we'll get this little block done. So this little block measures currently 6 inches, so it's a 5.5 inch finished block, and I would suggest that you put it in with some sashing so that it gets the space around it, so that the shadow aspect really can stand out nicely. So that's what I'm going ahead. I'm going to be putting sashing on mine, as I have up on those ones up there. So to do that, we need a little strip that goes on the side here with a square on the end, and a strip that goes right the way across on the lower edge with a little square on the end. So I've gone ahead and I've got my strips here. So you could just cut it in narrow strips 1.5 inches wide, or in this case I've cut a whole long strip the width of that, which happens to be 4 inches, and then I've cut a 1.5 inch strip of the light or the background colour, so, and joined them into a long strip, and then I'm slicing so that I've got the pieces all ready to go. And the same thing on this lower edge. I've got a 1.5 inch strip of the light background, and I've got a 5-inch strips. Because my strips are going to finish at 1 inch, the difference in the cutting is going to be 1 inch, because we're adding and subtracting that way. So by doing it this way, you can just slice up the blocks, because the chances are the shadows will all be the same fabrics, even if your other pieces are different. So once you've got those two, so one is definitely wider than the other, I would suggest that you could lay them on top of one another, and I would line up at the end, line up using the measurements markings on your board to help you get things nice and straight. I would line that up. I would trim off the edge so that I've got a nice starting point at one end, and then because I'm cutting mine 1.5 inches for a 1 inch finished shadow, I am going to slice 1.5 inches. So that's a pair, so that's one block's worth of shadow each time you do it, if you lay them on top of each other like this. And just, if everything's sitting nice and straight, you can just come along and slice this up to your heart's content. Now if you're making a larger quilt where you need lots of pieces, you may need to make more than one set of these, of course, according to how many blocks you're making. So I only need a few today just to show you what we're doing. So this is the block we're trying to make. So I just need a pair here. So that's going to be my side, and that longer piece goes across as the lower edge. So we'll just do a couple. You can chain piece these through. So I'm just going to pop that. So this is going to be the top edge, and I'm going to line up my edges and sew with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'll pop the two through just so that you can see what I mean by the chain piecing. So I've got my edge here, I've got my little zigs coming to the edge of that fabric, and I'm doing my 1/4 inch seam. I've got a 1/4 inch foot on, and we can just pop the next one in while we're here. And you can just, if you know how many blocks you're making, you can get them all ready and just chain piece them through. So this is a fairly quick quilt to make, and you don't have to just have colours like I've got in the squares here. They could be I Spy novelty fabrics, they could be some very delicious graphic prints, they could be really whatever it is that you happen to like. So it's a fairly, as I said, a fairly quick block to make. I'll just bring the iron over, and I'm going to press that seam into the square. There's no really good reason for that. I just decided that was a good place for it to go. And I'll do both while we're here. And now we need to pop the shadow along the other edge. So the two background squares are in diagonally opposite corners. So I'm going to position it on there so that my backgrounds are in opposite diagonal corners, but I'm going to sew from this side because I want to see where that pinked edge is sitting relative to my other piece of fabric. So this way I can do that, and I'm going to sew along here, and I just want those points to stay level with that edge of that fabric there. And I can pop this one through while I'm here. So quite a lot of fun to have a little play with something like this. In general, all the shadows sit on one side, because if you imagine it as a light source creating shadows, then the light would be coming from the same direction for all of our blocks. So I'm just going to press that into the square again, just the same way as the other one. And now we've got two sides on our square. And we now have two more blocks with shadows. And you can see that if you set them together, the chances are you're not going to particularly see that shadow effect. So if you set it around with a nice sashing, then that will really help create that effect. So I've gone ahead and I've done a block here. So what I've done is I've popped a piece of sashing down one side, and I've attached my sashing to my blocks rather than doing a great long strip. So we can go ahead, I'll sew this one so that you can see me doing one. So I'm just going to, now these edges are all straight edges. We're not sewing the pinked edge this time, so I can pop this through. And I'll just press that. This time I'm going to press it into the sashing. And then we just need to have this lower edge along here. So this is the measurements of the block, but it's actually the sashing, so it's not really part of the block in that sense. And what it will mean is that we've got sashing on two sides of the blocks. So when it comes to putting the quilt together, I'll get this on. We still need to have some sashing on the top side and the right hand side according to the way I've attached these. So now we can join those together and you can see that you can get that nice bit of spacing in between like we've got up here. But this piece up here is only pinned because I'm probably going to make a larger quilt. I have joined all of these up. So we still need to have the sashing, so you could just treat it as a border down the side and right the way across the top when you've put all your blocks together. I just thought it was a fun thing to show you how to attach a shadow. So I've got a picture of a quilt that you could do something like that here, and I'll also just showing you perhaps with a darker background that it can still look really effective. You will need to make your shadow contrast with the background if you're going to use a darker background, so not too dark so that you can see that shadow there. But I think a very effective little block, a great way to use some of those 5-inch squares that we all seem to enjoy so much, and some background and a little shadow. So that was our little shadow block using some 5-inch squares. Thank you, and I will see you again with some other tutorial.